Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I met my wife in college. We were both studying literature and bonded over late night study sessions and terrible cafeteria coffee. She was smart, funny, and had this way of making even the most boring Shakespeare analysis feel like an adventure. I was working part-time at a bookstore to pay for school, living in a cramped apartment with two roommates. Nothing fancy, but I was happy. When I finally worked up the courage to ask her out, she said yes immediately. We dated through our last 2 years of college, and by graduation, I knew she was the one. I saved up for months to buy her a simple engagement ring, nothing extravagant, but it meant everything to us. That's when I met her mother. When my future mother-in-law laid eyes on me, I could see the disappointment wash over her face. I was wearing my best shirt and pants, but they were clearly second-hand. My shoes were polished but old. I worked at that bookstore and had just started as a junior editor at a small publishing house. My salary was barely enough to cover rent and groceries. She immediately started grilling me about my job and how much money I made. When I told her I was an editor at a small publishing company, she seemed unimpressed. My fiancé tried to tell her mother that asking about salary wasn't appropriate behavior, but her mother brushed off the concern. She explained that she was just trying to understand how I planned to support her daughter in the manner she deserved. The manner she deserves became her favorite phrase. Every conversation somehow circled back to money and status. She made it clear that she thought her daughter was settling for someone beneath her station. When our wedding approached, the criticism got worse. She complained about everything. The venue was too small, the flowers were too cheap, the menu wasn't elegant enough. Every suggestion she made would have cost triple our budget. 2 weeks before the wedding, she pulled her daughter aside during a family dinner. She questioned whether my fiancé was really sure about marrying me, suggesting that she could do so much better. She warned that I would never be able to give her the life she grew up with. My fiancé told her mother that she loved me and that we were happy together, but her mother just shook her head and said that love doesn't pay the bills. She predicted that we'd be struggling for years and that my fiancé would regret her choice. Then came the bet. The night before our wedding during the rehearsal dinner, she approached us with a smug smile. She told us she had a proposition for us lovebirds. When my fiancé asked what she was talking about, her mother announced that she was betting us $10 that she wouldn't shed a single tear at our wedding the next day. We looked at each other, confused. When I asked why she would bet on something like that, she explained that she didn't get emotional about mistakes. She said that when people make poor choices, she doesn't get weepy about it. My fiancé was hurt, but I was angry. I told her she was on and stuck out my hand to shake on it. The wedding was beautiful despite her negativity. My wife looked stunning, and when we said our vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the place, including her mother's. She tried to hide it, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, but everyone could see she was crying. After the ceremony during the reception, I approached her and reminded her about the bet. She pretended not to know what I was talking about at first, but when I pressed her about the $10, since she had clearly cried during the ceremony, she looked around hoping no one was listening. Instead of pulling out a $10 bill, she grabbed two $5 bills from her purse and literally threw them on the floor at my feet. She told me bitterly that the money could go toward our inevitable divorce. Several guests nearby heard her and looked shocked. My wife turned red with embarrassment, but I just picked up the money and smiled. I thanked her and said we'd put it in our savings account. After we got back from our honeymoon, the phone calls started. Every single conversation, no matter how it began, ended up being about grandchildren. She would call asking if we had any news to share. When my wife would ask what kind of news she meant, her mother would explain that she was obviously talking about pregnancy. She'd remind us that we'd been married for however many months it had been at the time. My wife would try to deflect by saying we were settling into married life just fine, but her mother would persist. She complained that she wasn't getting any younger and that she wanted to be able to enjoy her grandchildren while she still could. This went on for years. Every holiday gathering, every birthday party, every random Tuesday phone call. The woman was obsessed. She'd make little comments about how empty our spare bedroom looked, or how nice it would be to have little feet running around. Around our 8th anniversary, my wife and I had a serious conversation about kids. We'd always been lukewarm about the idea, but now we had to really think about it. I asked my wife if she actually wanted children, and she admitted that she honestly wasn't sure. But when she asked me the same question, I told her that I kept trying to picture it, but just didn't feel that desire other people talk about. Then I brought up the elephant in the room. Could she imagine dealing with her mother if we had kids? My wife groaned and said her mother would probably try to move in with us. That's when it hit us. We realized that even if we'd been on the fence about having children, the thought of giving my mother-in-law what she wanted most in the world was enough to push us into the no kids camp. I scheduled a vasectomy the next month. We decided not to tell anyone, especially not her mother. Instead, we just let her keep hoping and asking and getting more frustrated with each passing year. Watching her get more and more desperate was satisfying. At family gatherings, she'd corner relatives and complain about how we were being selfish and wasting time. She started suggesting fertility doctors and making not-so-subtle hints about biological clocks. She would tell us that if we were having trouble conceiving, there were specialists who could help. My wife would patiently explain that we weren't having trouble, but her mother would demand to know what was taking so long since we've been married for so many years. I would tell her that these things happen when they're meant to happen, which would only make her more frustrated. She'd snap back that biology doesn't work that way and that we needed to be more proactive. The phone calls became more frequent and more pushy. She'd send us articles about the benefits of having children, baby clothes just in case, and even went so far to set up a college savings account for her future grandchild. By year 15 of marriage, she was practically frantic. She'd call complaining that she didn't understand what we were waiting for, reminding us that she was already in her 70s. My wife would try to end the conversation by suggesting that maybe it just wasn't meant to be, but her mother would get angry and tell her not to give her that fate nonsense. She'd insist that we needed to try harder. The irony became even sweeter when my wife's siblings started having children. Suddenly, my mother-in-law had the grandchildren she'd always wanted, but she couldn't help herself from complaining about the timing. She would whine that if only we had given her grandchildren when she was younger, she could have really enjoyed them. Now she claimed she was too old to keep up with the little ones. My wife would simply say that's how it worked out, which would make her mother even more frustrated. She'd insist that it didn't have to work out that way, and that we could have started trying years ago. Even now, decades later, she occasionally brings it up. We just smile and change the subject, sharing a secret look that still makes us both want to laugh. The revenge wasn't proving her wrong about our marriage lasting, though we're coming up on 47 years and still madly in love. The revenge was watching her spend decades desperately wanting something from us that we'd made sure she could never have, all while she had no idea we'd taken that possibility off the table years ago. I work as a child therapist and have been doing it for 8 years now. I thought I'd seen everything. Kids with anxiety, depression, trauma, from divorce, you name it. But nothing prepared me for what I witnessed last Tuesday while visiting my sister's new house in the suburbs. My sister had just moved into this 2-story colonial, and I was helping her unpack boxes in the living room when we heard this commotion from next door. Through the window, I could see into the neighbor's backyard, where a woman was standing below their second-floor window, arms outstretched, looking up at a small boy perched on the windowsill. At first, I figured the kid had climbed up there by accident and his mom was trying to coax him down safely. But then I heard her voice clearly through the open windows. The woman was telling her son to jump, promising she would catch him. The little boy, who was maybe 6 years old, was gripping the window frame with white knuckles. Even from my sister's house, I could see he was terrified. The boy said he didn't want to jump and that it was too high. His mother called him a baby and said this was how they build confidence. She told him all the other kids his age would have jumped by now. My sister and I looked at each other in horror. This wasn't some kind of accident or emergency situation. This woman was actually encouraging her child to jump from a second-story window. I asked what the hell she was doing. My sister said she didn't know, but that it was insane. She wondered if we should go over there. Before I could answer, the situation got worse. The boy started crying, clearly scared out of his mind, but instead of helping him down, his mother got more aggressive. She told him to stop crying and said he was embarrassing her. She complained that the neighbors were probably watching and thinking she raised a coward. She wasn't wrong about the neighbors watching, but for completely different reasons than she thought. I rushed outside, my sister right behind me. I yelled at her, asking what she was doing, and demanded she get that kid down from there. The woman turned toward me with this angry expression, like I was the one being unreasonable. She told me this was her son and her property. She claimed she was teaching him confidence-building exercises and called it tough love, asking if I had heard of it. I told her this wasn't tough love and that he could break his neck from at least 15 feet up. She said she was obviously going to catch him and brag that she did gymnastics in high school and knew what she was doing. The boy was still sobbing on the windowsill, and my heart was breaking for him. This wasn't building confidence, this was traumatizing a child. I told her he was terrified and that this wasn't teaching confidence, but child endangerment. She told me to mind my own business and asked if I had kids. She said she could tell I didn't and claimed only someone without kids would interfere with a mother's parenting choices. That's when I pulled out my phone and started dialing 911. I've worked with enough traumatized kids to know this was not normal parenting, not even close. She asked what I was doing and demanded I put the phone away. I told her I was calling the police because this was dangerous and she needed to stop. The woman completely lost it. She started screaming. She called me an interfering witch and asked how I dared to do this. She accused me of harassment and threatened to sue me for calling the police on a loving mother. Then she turned back to her son and her voice became mean. She ordered him to jump right now. She said these busybody neighbors wanted to cause trouble for them, so he should show them how brave he was. She demanded he jump that instant. The poor kid was hyperventilating at this point. The combination of his mother screaming and the pressure to jump right away sent him into a complete panic. Instead of the controlled jump his mother was expecting, he basically fell forward in terror. The woman positioned herself to catch him, but there was no way someone her size could safely catch a falling child from that height. The boy hit her arms, but the momentum sent them both tumbling backward. She managed to break part of his fall, but his leg hit the ground at a horrible angle. The sound of his scream will haunt me forever. She kept telling him he was okay and fine, insisting he should just walk it off, but it was obvious the boy wasn't fine. His leg was bent wrong, and he couldn't put any weight on it. He was crying hysterically, calling for his mommy, while she kept insisting he was just being dramatic. The paramedics arrived within minutes, followed closely by police officers. When they were loading the boy into the ambulance, one of the EMTs told us what we all suspected. His leg was definitely broken. The police officer took statements from everyone. The woman tried to spin it as an accident, claiming her son had climbed out there on his own and she was just trying to help him down. She told the officer she would never endanger her child and accused the neighbors of lying because they didn't like her. But other neighbors had heard the whole thing and backed up my account. Plus, my sister had actually managed to record part of it on her phone when she saw me calling 911. The officer explained they would need to contact Child Protective Services. He said encouraging a child to jump from a second-story window didn't fall under normal parenting, even if her intentions were good. The woman called this ridiculous and insisted she was building his character. She claimed her mother did the same thing with her and she turned out fine. Looking at her screaming at police officers while her son was being taken to the hospital with a broken leg, I had serious doubts about how fine she turned out. 2 days later, my sister told me that Child Protective Services had opened an investigation. The boy was staying with his grandmother while his mother attended mandatory parenting classes and anger management. My wife and I had been searching for our first family home for months. After years of cramped apartment living with our 2 young kids, we finally found a place we could afford. It wasn't fancy, but it had 3 bedrooms and a small garden. Most importantly, it had a shared driveway that came with 2 designated parking spaces according to the property deeds. The house inspection went smoothly, and we were excited about the move. The real estate agent mentioned that we'd be sharing the driveway with the neighbors in the larger house next door, but assured us that our parking spaces were clearly defined in the land registry documents. We made sure to get copies of everything, including the boundary lines and property rights. After dealing with landlords for years, we wanted to know exactly what we owned. Moving day was chaotic. The kids were running around while we tried to coordinate the movers, and I barely had time to wave at the elderly couple next door who were watching from their window. They seemed pleasant enough standing there in their matching cardigans. It took us about a week to settle in, but one thing became clear pretty quickly. We had a storage problem. The house was great, but there was nowhere to put the kids' bikes, scooters, and outdoor toys. Every night we had to drag everything into the narrow hallway, and every morning we'd trip over it, all trying to get out the door. The bikes were getting scratched up from being moved constantly, and my daughter was upset that her new pink bicycle was already looking worn. I spent a weekend researching small storage solutions and found these perfect compact bike sheds. They were only about 2 feet deep and 4 feet tall, designed for narrow spaces. They would sit completely on our portion of the driveway, well below the fence line, and wouldn't block anyone's access to anything. I decided to knock on their door and let them know about our plans. I figured it was just common courtesy, even though we didn't technically need their permission for something on our own property. The husband answered the door. He was probably in his 70s, wearing a pressed shirt even though it was Saturday morning. His wife appeared behind him, clutching what looked like a religious pamphlet. I introduced myself and explained that we were planning to install a couple of small bike sheds on our driveway. I made sure to mention that they were really compact and wouldn't cause any issues for their access or anything. He looked at me like I just suggested building a casino. He asked about bike sheds on the driveway with obvious disapproval in his voice. I confirmed that yes, we wanted small ones that would be entirely on our designated parking area according to the property deeds. I described how they would be about 2 feet deep and 4 feet tall, sitting below the fence line so they wouldn't be visible from their windows. His wife whispered something to him, and his expression grew stern. He told me that it would not be acceptable. I asked what he meant by not acceptable, explaining that the sheds would be on our property, well within our boundaries. He then said something that made my jaw drop. He told me I needed to understand that they owned the largest house on the street, which made them the senior household. He said that when it came to decisions about the shared area, he had the final say. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what I just heard. I asked him to clarify what he meant by senior household, pointing out that the sheds would be entirely within our property lines. His wife stepped forward, nodding along. She explained that they had lived there for 35 years and knew what was appropriate for the neighborhood and what wasn't. She said that storage sheds were unseemly. The husband agreed completely. He said that they were the senior household. It was their responsibility to maintain standards. He told me that those sheds were not acceptable. I tried to stay respectful and pointed out that they didn't own our parking spaces. I mentioned that we had the deeds that clearly showed our property boundaries. That's when he said something even more ridiculous. He called me son and explained that size matters. He said that because their house was twice the size of ours, they had more say in community decisions. This wasn't a homeowners association. This was just a shared driveway between 2 separate properties. I told him I appreciated his concern, but we weren't asking for permission. We were just being courteous by letting him know our plans. His wife chimed in that being courteous would mean respecting their elders and the established residents of the street. The husband made his position clear once again. No bike sheds, and that was final. He started to close the door, but I stopped him. I wanted to be absolutely clear about what he was saying. I asked if he was really saying that because his house was bigger, he got to decide what we did on our own property. He said that was exactly what he was saying. We were supposed to recognize them as the senior household and act accordingly. The door slammed shut, leaving me standing there. I went back inside and told my wife what had happened. She thought I was joking at first. She couldn't believe he had actually said senior household, like he was some kind of neighborhood king. I told her his exact words and explained how he apparently thought having a bigger house gave him veto power over our property decisions. We pulled out all our property documents that night and went through them carefully. There was absolutely nothing giving the neighbors any authority over our parking spaces or what we could put on them. The boundary lines were crystal clear, and our designated area was entirely separate from theirs. The next weekend, I ordered the bike sheds online. They arrived 2 weeks later, and I spent Saturday morning assembling them. They looked perfect, exactly what I'd planned. Small, neat, and completely within our property boundaries. The kids were thrilled to finally have a proper place for their bikes. Around noon, I heard shouting from next door. The neighbor was yelling that this was unacceptable and that he had told me those sheds were not allowed. He was standing at his window, gesturing wildly. His wife appeared beside him, shaking her head dramatically. I walked over to the fence line and explained that the sheds were on our property, exactly where I said they'd be. They didn't affect his access or block his view. He shouted back that he was the senior household and that I had been told this was not acceptable. I reminded him that I had told him we weren't asking for permission. These were our parking spaces according to the legal documents. His wife threatened that they would see about that and announced they were calling the authorities. I told them to feel free and that I'd be happy to show whoever came our property deeds. They did call someone, though I'm not sure who. A few days later, a city inspector showed up to check that our sheds met local regulations. They did perfectly. He even complimented us on choosing such appropriate low-profile storage solutions. The inspector mentioned that the neighbors had complained about unauthorized construction, but when he explained that we were well within our rights and building codes, they apparently became quite upset about young people with no respect. It's been 6 months now and we haven't spoken to the neighbors since. They look at us from their windows sometimes, and I've noticed they've started parking their car close to our property line, though still technically on their side. The kids love their bike sheds, their bicycles stay clean and dry, and our hallway is finally clear. My daughter's pink bike still looks brand new. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.